Thank you, Chairman and Committee, for this opportunity to testify. Again, my name is Mae Roos. I'm a senior at Bora High School, and I'm speaking today in firm opposition to HB 54. Because, firstly, this bill is a violation of one of the most essential aspects of our democracy, the 24th Amendment, which outlawed the poll tax. This bill bans the use of student IDs as a pathway to vote, but this is one of the only cost-free forms of identification available to us to let us participate in democracy. The other options outlined in the bill are a driver's license, which costs $30, passports, which cost $130, tribal IDs, upwards of $10, license to conceal carry, $20, and state IDs, also $20. But beyond the exact monetary value of these options, the fact that they carry any amount at all carries an immeasurable and deeply unconstitutional symbolic weight of disenfranchisement. The 24th Amendment was created to combat elitism and class discrimination as a barrier to vote, and this seeks to roll back that progress. But beyond the constitutional violation this bill commits, I think it sends a very unfortunate message to the youth of Idaho. Students are the demographic most heavily impacted by this legislation, and young people in Idaho carry the future of democracy on our shoulders. But when we're taught from the very beginning, when we first start trying to participate, that voting is an expensive process, an arduous process, a process rife with barriers, we become disillusioned with that great dream of our democracy. We start to believe that our voices are not valued. If this is the understanding we as young people develop of the political process, this is a false message we will carry with us for the rest of our lives. Idaho already has incredibly low voter participation rates that will only continue to crumble if we are taught disenfranchisement from the very beginning. We will establish today that the risk and reality of voter fraud using student IDs is minuscule. They carry more than sufficient information to trigger the extensive precinct databases which link our names to our social security numbers. But the risk of constitutional violation, disenfranchisement, and decline in democratic participation is clear and concrete. We must weigh the harms versus the benefits to our democracy and the people of Idaho in this instance. And it's clear to see that preserving access to the ballot box in every way possible is of utmost importance. Sweet. Ready for questions.
Thank you, Mae. You did a good job. Are there questions for Mae? Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mae, can you tell me can you describe or maybe show us a student ID card?
Yes, for sure. Let's see, I have mine on me right now. So I actually carry my student ID card with me all the time because our school has implemented this system in which our student ID cards have a magnetic electronic signal on them, which allows us to open the doors to our school. Oh, this is actually my friend. She's right over there. She'll testify in a second. So it has our picture, has our name, has our grade, has the date, has Bora High School on it, and also that electronic messaging. So that's why I think it'd be so incredibly difficult to fake one of these, because it's not just a piece of plastic like it used to be. It actually has that magnetic signal attached to it, which then connects to the school databases, which include all that information, like our name, our social security, and everything like that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
For sure.
Mae, I've got a question. If you got to provide photo ID to purchase a firearm, can you use that photo ID to purchase a firearm?
So I am not entirely sure about that, but I mean, voting is a lot different than purchasing a firearm because this is about participation in democracy, not purchasing a deadly weapon. So I don't think that's an accurate comparison.
They're both constitutional rights. And so if we're going to use a form of ID, I just wanted to make sure possibly it would be the same form of ID. Representative Crane, 12.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask along a similar line of Mae. Do you have you ever flown on an airplane?
I sure have, yeah.
Okay.
Follow up?
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly.
What did you use for proof of who you were to get on the airplane?
So it kind of depends. When I was a kid, I used my passport because that was the only form of identification I had. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, I use my star card. But both of those things were purchased by my parents, who luckily had the funds to be able to purchase those. But I know that's really not accessible to many people. Like I said, passports cost $130, which is pretty exorbitant for students to have to afford.
Follow up?
Yeah, follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when you become 21, mm-hmm. You'll be able to purchase alcohol if you choose to do that. They will ask for a star card, mm-hmm. which is a driver's license. They're not going to accept your student ID. So I think there's many things, whether you're flying on an airplane, whether you're buying alcohol, buying cigarettes, any of those activities that are going to require a valid identification. And I think that's what this legislation seeks to do, is to make sure that the same parameters are around voting, which is a very, very important thing, that you would for regular activities such as flying, buying alcohol, or buying cigarettes. So.
Yeah, I
do. Respond, Mae?
Oh. Oh, I would love
You're
to.
fine. Go
Sorry.
ahead.
I do agree that preventing voter fraud is very important. However, I think the risk here is so minuscule that it's outweighed by the disenfranchisement that would occur. And also beyond that, I mean, I think it makes sense that we can't use our student IDs to purchase alcohol since students are below the age to purchase alcohol in many instances. So again, I just think the comparison is not exactly the same there. Like high school students couldn't purchase alcohol anyway, so it wouldn't make sense for us to use our student ID there. But yeah.
I see you've elicited another question from Crane 12.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and May. I think what we're doing right here is a result of the voting process, which tells you how important voting is and that it is secure and that it is right. You're right, flying on an airplane and going to Mexico is a lot of fun, but this is very serious, and you can see that's why there's public testimony. The decisions that are made and voting has very, very big implications. So I think it's even more heightened than buying alcohol, cigarettes, and flying on an airplane. So thank you.
You want to respond?
May I respond?
Absolutely, you can.
Oh yeah. So I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, you all were voted in as representatives, which is why, again, it's so deeply essential. And I think that's why it's so critical that we preserve the future of our democracy in Idaho. And young people are that future. We are the future of democracy in Idaho. But when we're told over and over again by bills like this in our legislature that voting is hard, voting should be expensive, our voices aren't valued, then we are going to start to believe that message. And we're not going to want to participate in our democratic process. And eventually it's going to crumble because we are the future of that democratic process, which is why I think it's so essential that students especially have access to the ballot box in every way possible so we can continue to believe in democracy and participate in it.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and May. Thanks for coming today, and you're
for
really
sure.
well spoken, and you're probably our biggest connection to the youth. So we're asking you tons of questions. Sorry about that.
Yeah, for sure. You're good.
I'm curious if you have friends in high school that are not U.S. citizens that have a student ID.
May?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So me personally, I do not. While our student IDs might not give us the information that we're a citizen, the way that they connect to the information we had to provide when we registered to vote would be able to verify that we're citizens.
Thank you.
Representative Barbieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May, you did not mention your date of birth on your student ID. Is that on there?
So in the Bora specifically, it's not, but our grade level is. And again, our names and our schools and our grade level is enough to connect to the school databases and the voter databases, which would provide that date of birth for you.
Representative Allgood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with Representative Scott. You're doing a great job.
Thanks.
And my last child graduated in 2020. I'm really impressed with your student ID because my daughter's student ID was not near that technological. It was a pretty basic ID. And with that, I just wanted to make the point that you have a pretty cool student ID. If you go to Pocatello or Notice, Idaho High School, every one of those student IDs are going to be different because they're generated by the school. And I think that is a problem with using state student ID because, again, we're going to have, I don't know how many school districts in Idaho, but they're all going to be very different. And not have, like I said, my daughter's ID did not have the technology that you're explaining in your ID. I think that creates some identification problem. But thank you, you're doing a great job.
Thank you for the comments. Do you want to respond?
I'd love to respond.
Certainly.
Okay, cool. So I guess I kind of have two responses to that one. I think the first one is that like getting the information on each individual school district is going to require a lot of research. And I think that's research we should be doing. We should be studying, we should be collecting data on which schools do use electronic student IDs, which schools don't. And I think that's data that we evidently don't have access to today. So I think it would be unfortunate if we voted on this and passed it before we have all that information available to us. And the second answer is these electronic student IDs are fairly recently implemented, but they're implemented pretty widespread across the Idaho area. Like last night, I was talking to some kids from Eagle about this bill, and they were explaining how even in their like more rural high school, they also have this form of electronic student ID. So though it is a recent change, it is a widespread change.
Any further questions? May, I've got an ID here.
Oh, cool.
Exact similar ID. I sell these.
Oh,
So in the business that I operate, I've got a printer in my office. And when we have customers that want to get an access card, is really what they are. It's got a magnetic stripe in it, or it's got a proximity wire inside of that that allows it to do an RFID reader. These cards can be purchased for anywhere between $3 and $5. The printer is we purchased on the internet, and so then we can put our logo on there or the company's logo. Do you know, is the state ID, the state issued ID, do people have access like that I would have access to purchase and produce these type of cards for students?
so I think I don't have a lot of data on like the process of purchasing a state ID. However, I think the most essential thing to focus on here is not the information contained within the student ID, but rather the information that the government has access to when we register to vote. Again, our social security number, our full name. So when I go to vote, I provide to you my full name. The voter precinct looks up, they see my social security number, they verify that I'm alive, I'm a valid voter, I have citizenship and everything else. And in that moment, they use the extensive data they have to verify that my vote is valid. And if someone else were to come up later and try to pretend that they're my name, the precinct, again, would already have that data saved and stored. So I think it's less of a matter of being able to provide that false identification, but rather depending on the extensive systems and structures we have in place to prevent voter fraud already.
Okay, perfect. Representative Andrus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a question. Based on that story, you mentioned that if it's going back to that database, and if you go first and then somebody tries to impersonate you and comes later, what happens if the person trying to impersonate comes first? How can you verify that you're the real person and not the one that already voted?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and I think one that our political processes put a lot of effort into, because obviously voter fraud is a huge issue. So there's a lot of safeguards against it, and again, voter precincts are small enough that I'm not stealing the name of someone across the country. I'm stealing the name of my neighbors. So in our tight-knit Idaho communities, our ability to catch that fraud and detect it early on, I think, is extremely heightened. And also, I mean, we already have those safeguards in place, and they're evidently working since voter fraud is extremely minuscule. So I think it would just be a matter of continuing and bolstering those systems.
Okay, thank you, Mae.